The Ezra 6:14 Challenge. What is it? Basically, it's a set of objective facts that all of the many interpretations of the 70 weeks prophecy in the Book of Daniel can be weighed against. It removes as much interpretation bias as possible and tries to place each on equal ground. We'll get into it in just a little bit. I have quite a collection of presentations available now. If you are new to these, it takes a big commitment of time to work through them and hopefully verify for yourself all the evidence is given. I understand that often people are not prepared to spend this effort without knowing more about what the underlying assumptions are and if this information can be trusted. My goal here is to present an overview and summary. But there are pros and cons to doing this. There is obviously no way that everything can be developed fully in an overview. So it can only serve to whet the appetite, and not every point will be supported with the references and sources that do exist. But be assured that everything can be supported, and you can find this information in the more detailed presentations. As of yet, I've not been invited to give a presentation at one of the many prophecy conferences. But I thought it would be an interesting challenge to put together something as if it were to be presented as a conference topic. Give my overview in the same amount of time as is usually given to a speaker, about 45 minutes, and then allowing 15 minutes for questions. So let's begin. First, we have to talk about having an open mind, one that can honestly evaluate and weigh different ideas. It's very common to sit with an attitude of crossed arms, defiant to any ideas which challenge our preconceived thoughts. I know what I believe, and don't you dare say anything that is different, or I'll combat you with 5 Bible verses that prove you're wrong. There's several types of behavior people display when they have closed minds. First, you've got the trolls. Nothing you say will change their minds. Their main goal is just to cause trouble. You see them put childish emojis on everything. Second, you've got the ostriches. They think that if they don't look at anything else, they can stay safe in their ignorance. If it doesn't exist, it doesn't exist if they don't know about it. Third, you've got the deflectors. No matter what evidence you present, they will ignore you and change the subject back to their pet interpretation. Fourth, you've got the twisters. They use pieces of scripture totally out of context. Often they use King James English to create their particular prophecy systems. Next, you've got the personal revelations. They have never investigated historical evidence. Their interpretations are validated in their own minds by saying, "That's what it means to me." And finally, you've got the projectors. They will never admit that their understanding can be proven incorrect. They will accuse others of being closed-minded and not according to Scripture. They will accuse people of behaving and thinking exactly like they are behaving and thinking. Do you recognize yourself in this list? Now, I don't list these things to offend anyone. Some of these are normal reactions to ideas which are new and different. But we've got to be aware of these attitudes and combat them in order to honestly evaluate information that is new to us. We have to realize that we don't know what we don't know. When we consider Daniel 9 and the prophecy of the 70 weeks, people have very strong ideas. Their viewpoint is deeply entrenched. Some people are tied to their particular denomination's official interpretation, where if you want to be part of that community, you have to believe that particular interpretation or potentially face being ostracized. Others have hitched their understanding to a particular prophecy teacher or pastor. This makes it harder to reconsider a strongly held view because if the teacher has been shown to have good teaching in other areas, then there is a stronger bond to accept their particular views on prophecy as well. Then there are others who have spent much time in their own personal study and research, and they own their strongly held beliefs. There have been many differing interpretations proposed throughout the history of the Church and across the many denominations. But there can only be one correct interpretation. How are you going to evaluate which one that is? Maybe it doesn't even exist yet. After all, Gabriel said one of the purposes of the prophecy was to seal up vision and prophecy. And in his last vision, Gabriel counsels Daniel, "But as for you, Daniel, conceal these words and seal up the book until the time of the end." Does there exist some method to weigh all the various options against? A standard? I think that there definitely is. It's called the Ezra 6:14 Challenge. This standard is made up of a group of at least 6 facts that can be identified regarding the prophecy. They remove as much interpretation bias as possible. They describe details about the original text, the Hebrew text. These facts must be explained and properly taken into account by any proposed interpretation of the 70 weeks prophecy. Not all these facts are found in Ezra 6:14, but they are all directly related to what this verse says. And what does it say? It is Ezra's summary statement of the temple reconstruction in Jerusalem after the period of exile in Babylon. And the elders of the Jews were building and succeeding through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo. So they built and completed the temple according to the decree of the God of Israel, and the decree of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. Let's go through the 6 facts about the 70 weeks prophecy. First, Ezra lists 4 commands, which were given, allowing for the rebuilding and completion of the Second Temple. Notice this important point. Ezra does not state that all the decrees contained language about rebuilding the temple, but that they allowed for the completion to happen. Another important point about the decrees is to recognize that the decree given by Artaxerxes in his 20th year did not address the temple in any way. Instead, it allowed for Nehemiah to rebuild the walls and the city of Jerusalem. This particular decree is after Ezra's list of the 4 commands given. These decrees by earthly rulers are constantly argued over as to which one was the one referred to in the prophecy of the 70 weeks. But notice that Ezra includes one which almost no one takes into account, the first one in the list, given by God himself. When exactly was this done? We'll look into that soon. Second, in Daniel 9:25, some translations use the word decree. Others, the phrase, the going out of a word. The Hebrew word used here is Davar. It means speech, utterance, words. The important fact to recognize is that Daniel never uses this Hebrew word to refer to an official decree by an earthly king. Never. And third, it is essential to have an accurate reading of the original text from the Hebrew. English translations try their best, but it must be recognized that they always contain the interpretation bias of the translators. and this results in variations in grammar. These variations lead to a very different understanding of the prophetic material. The goal here is to translate the Hebrew as accurately as possible into English. I've chosen to use the ESV as the base text for this, because it is very accurate grammatically. But still, it can be improved, in my opinion. There are two very important characteristics of ancient Hebrew. There was no differentiation between capital letters and lowercase letters. So let's organize the text to remove capital letters. Second, there was no punctuation. Because of this, the word "and" was used to signal a change in thought, basically a new sentence. At each "and," start a new line. In addition, some words from the ESV have been modified to express a more precise meaning of the original text. These are the words in orange. "And" is used to start a new thought, a new sentence. It is also used to combine similar items. Let's modify the text in this way where it is obviously meant. Now the artificial verse numbers can be removed. The text can be grouped into similar subject matter, having to do with the particular groupings of weeks. Organizing the original text in this way leads to a very different understanding of the text than is usually found in most English translations, including the King James Version. The three groups of weeks are now separated and clearly defined. Each has a specific beginning and an end, and each contains a particular purpose. Several other facts also become evident. The first set of weeks, the 7 weeks, stand out as a separate group. What is the purpose of these first 7 weeks, or 49 years? Fifth, many English translations see the word "and" between the first 7 weeks and the next 62 weeks. They combine them together as similar items and treat them as a total set of 69 weeks. However, examining the last 1 week, there is the same grammatical structure in the Hebrew text. There is an "and" between 1 week and half the week. So why do these translations not do the same thing to combine these weeks together and come up with 1.5 weeks? Why are they not consistent with the text? Obviously, this would result in a total of 70.5 weeks, and Gabriel has said there were only 70 weeks in total. Next, the first 7 weeks are clearly stated to begin from the going out of the word concerning to return to and to build Jerusalem. The words used in Hebrew are Shub and Bana. Let's examine the decrees of the kings, which are commonly argued over. The text of the 3 decrees included in Ezra. These are the decrees by Cyrus, by Darius, and the one in the 7th year of Artaxerxes. The decree of Cyrus allowed for exiles from all of the 12 tribes of Israel to return to Jerusalem. It allowed for the rebuilding of the temple specifically. The next decree, the decree of Darius, allowed for the completion of the temple. Then in the 7th year of Artaxerxes, his decree allowed for more settlers to return and was very specifically concerned with additional beautification of the temple. However, his next decree, in his 20th year, allowed for the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls with the help of another group of settlers. But it is significant to notice that this last decree is not included verbatim in the Bible. The narrative only mentions that Nehemiah traveled with letters from the king. During his visit, Gabriel tells Daniel to both know and have insight into what he is going to tell him. He wasn't just going to list a series of predictions. There was something significant in the very organization of the content that followed. Something special about the actual words that were used, Shub and Bana, to return to and to rebuild Jerusalem. Daniel has included overlooked clues for readers all through chapter 9. In verse 2, Daniel ties the entire prophecy to what he had been intensely studying and finally realized while reading the books of Jeremiah. Jeremiah was originally written in several scrolls. Daniel 9:2, I, Daniel, discerned in the books the number of the years concerning which the word of Yahweh came to Jeremiah, the prophet, for the fulfillment of the laying waste of Jerusalem. In Daniel 9:7, to you, O Lord, belongs righteousness, but to us open shame, as it is this day to the men of Judah, the inhabitants of Jerusalem. For under the whole heaven there has not been done anything like what was done to Jerusalem. Daniel 9:12. Let now your anger and your wrath turn away from your city, Jerusalem, your holy mountain. Daniel 9:16. O Lord, let your face shine on your desolate sanctuary. Daniel 9:19. O Lord, listen. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, give heed and take action. For your own sake, O my God, do not delay, because your city and your people are called by your name. Daniel 9:20. Now, while I was speaking and praying and presenting my supplication before Yahweh my God in behalf of the holy mountain of my God. And Daniel 9:21. And while I was still speaking in prayer, then the man Gabriel came about the time of the evening offering. All of this is related to the temple and life in Jerusalem. It has all been tied to the city of Jerusalem. And the very first part of the prophecy states, 70 weeks have been determined for your people and for your holy city. Daniel 9:24. So here is where we start addressing the Ezra 6:14 challenge. Daniel 9:22-23. Then he made me understand and spoke with me and said, O Daniel, I have now come forth to give you insight with understanding. At the beginning of your supplications, the word was issued. So I have come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. So understand the message and gain understanding in what has appeared. Gabriel had been sent out immediately. He was sent to give Daniel an immediate answer to his prayer, not an answer with information that would be understood in another 100 years after he was already dead. An answer that he could immediately go and study and have an understanding of. An answer tied to what he had already been investigating. An answer in the writings of Jeremiah. Daniel had been looking at the fulfillment of the word of God through Jeremiah about the prophesied end of 70 years. 70 years allotted to the empire of Babylon. Many people assume the 70 years was the length of the Jewish exile in Babylon, but that is not what Jeremiah prophesied. Jeremiah 29:10, "For thus says Yahweh, when 70 years have been fulfilled for Babylon, I will visit you and establish my good word to you, to return you to this place, Jerusalem." Gabriel starts the entire period of weeks with a play on words. He tells Daniel to go back to the Word of God in Jeremiah and look for where the return to and the rebuilding of Jerusalem is addressed. But not just the subject matter, where the very words that are used are the keys, Shub and Bana, from the starting point counting 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7, 49 years in total. Then there will be the arrival of a ruler, one who is God's anointed, in Hebrew, a Messiah. Daniel then reread through the books of Jeremiah to find where both those words, Shub and Bana, were used. God predicted multiple times that there would be a return to and rebuilding of Jerusalem after it would be destroyed by Babylon. But there is only one place where Jeremiah includes a date with the prophecy. In chapters 32 and 33, there is the narrative of Jeremiah's time in prison in Jerusalem. King Hezekiah and the population of Jerusalem were under siege by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Hezekiah had had enough of Jeremiah's prophecies that the city would fall and had him locked up. While there, God told him to expect a visit from his cousin, who would ask Jeremiah to buy his property in order to keep it within the family. A short time later, his cousin does visit, and Jeremiah does buy the field and has the deed signed and sealed and put in a clay jar, then hidden in expectation of the city's destruction. But Jeremiah was confused. He prays to God and points out what a hopeless situation this was. What use was it to purchase this property when the city was under siege and waiting for the inevitable destruction and complete exile of the population? God answers him and says, "For thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, concerning the houses of this city, Jerusalem, and concerning the houses of the kings of Judah, which are torn down to make a defense against the siege ramps and against the sword. I will return the exiles of Judah and the exiles of Israel and rebuild them as they were at first." Jeremiah 33, 4 and 7. God issues his promise, his command, that the people will return to and rebuild Jerusalem, using the two words Shub and Bana. This is what Daniel would have discovered. This is the word that went forth, which started the first 7 weeks. So what year did this happen? Jeremiah includes not just one date, but it's so important that he gives 2 dates to anchor this prophecy. Jeremiah 32 verse 1. The word that came to Jeremiah from Yahweh in the 10th year of Zedekiah king of Judah, which was the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar. To state it quickly and without getting into all the various details about how to date the reigns of ancient kings, 605 BC was when Nebuchadnezzar became the king of Babylon. 18 years later was 587 BC. This was 1 year before Jerusalem and the temple were burned and completely destroyed, and the majority of the population forced into exile. 587 BC was the start of the first 7 weeks. Gabriel stated that a period of 49 years would elapse until a Messiah, a ruler, would come. That would be in the year 538 BC. We have to consider what year was the 70 weeks prophecy given. When was Daniel doing all this? Daniel 5:31 and Daniel 9 verse 1 tell us that when the Medes and Persians conquered Babylon, Darius the Mede became king. Daniel 5:31. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. Daniel 9 verse 1. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, from the seed of the Medes, who was made king over the kingdom of the Babylonians. You see, the Babylonians had become the dominant nation in 609 BC. Exactly 70 years later, Babylon fell. Exactly as Jeremiah had predicted, and the very thing that caused Daniel to start his intercessory prayer in chapter 9. It was the year 539 BC. So Daniel would have known that within a year, the first 7 weeks, the 49 years, would be over, and a Messiah for his people would be revealed. And Daniel would have been in the perfect political position to engage with this Messiah, this ruler. As he says in Daniel 6:28, so this Daniel enjoyed success in the kingdom of Darius and the kingdom of Cyrus the Persian. Yes, Cyrus was this Messiah, the head of the Persian Empire in 538 BC. Cyrus was the first earthly ruler who issued a decree allowing the 12 tribes in exile to return to Jerusalem and to rebuild the temple there. Daniel would have shown him where God addressed Cyrus by name 200 years prior and prophesied that he would come to power. Thus says Yahweh, your Redeemer, and being the one who says of Jerusalem, she shall be inhabited, and of the cities of Judah they shall be built, and I will raise up her waste places again. It is I who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and all my good pleasure he will complete. And saying of Jerusalem, she will be built, and of the temple your foundation will be laid. Isaiah 44, 24, 26, and verse 28. And continuing on in Isaiah 45, 1 and verses 3 to 5, thus says Yahweh to Cyrus his anointed, or Messiah, whom I have taken hold by his right hand, to subdue nations before him, and to loose the loins of kings, to open doors before him, so that gates will not be shut. I will give you the treasures of darkness and hidden wealth of secret places, so that you may know that it is I, Yahweh, the God of Israel, who calls you by your name. For the sake of Jacob my servant, and Israel my chosen one, I have called you by your name. I am Yahweh, and there is no other. Besides me, there is no God. How do we know that Cyrus was shown the prophecy in Isaiah? In the decree that Cyrus made, he includes the very same concepts found in the prophecy. His decree is listed in Ezra 1, verses 1 to 2. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to complete the word of Yahweh from the mouth of Jeremiah, Yahweh stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he had a proclamation pass throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing, saying, thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, Yahweh, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and has appointed me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. This is what most people have missed. This is the true interpretation of the 70 weeks of Daniel, an interpretation where the text is treated literally. No alternate definition of a year is needed. It respects the cultural and historical time period, and it meets all the facts laid out in the Ezra 6:14 challenge. So that was the first 7 weeks. Where do the next 62 weeks fit in? The prophecy says that after the 62 weeks, a Messiah will be cut off. This is language implying sacrifice, of making a covenant, In addition, the temple, along with Jerusalem, will be destroyed. We have the advantage of looking back to know that this must have been before 70 AD, and even before 31 AD. These 62 weeks are entirely to do with restoring and rebuilding Jerusalem. Again, both words Shub and Bana occur in this part of the prophecy. Most people are not aware of just how many times the walls and temple were damaged, broken down, and then rebuilt over the following centuries. But exactly when did the rebuilding of Jerusalem first start? We've already discussed the contents of the decrees listed in Ezra 6:14. Each of the earthly decrees included language allowing only the reconstruction of the temple complex. However, Nehemiah specifically asked for permission to rebuild Jerusalem itself. In Nehemiah 2:5, I said to the king, "If it is good for the king, and if your servant is good before you, send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it." This decree took place in the 20th year of Artaxerxes, 445 BC. But this is one time when it would have been very helpful for more detailed information in the narrative. Now, Nehemiah does include very detailed information of how long the wall took to rebuild once he arrived in Jerusalem. However, examining the distance he had to travel in the time period assumed, but not actually stated, it's simply impossible for his caravan and building materials to have arrived in Jerusalem that same year. Josephus records some additional details. Now, when he was come to Babylon, that is, Nehemiah, and had taken with him many of his countrymen who voluntarily followed him, he came to Jerusalem in the 25th year of the reign of Artaxerxes. You find this in Antiquities 5:7. This would have been in 440 BC. From there, move forward the period of 62 weeks, or 434 years, and that ends in 6 BC. This is the year of birth for Messiah Jesus. It would take time which we do not have to provide the evidences for this. But this would explain how it was possible for the Magi and Simeon and Anna to know exactly when to expect the coming of Israel's Messiah, and that they were all seeking his birth in Jerusalem. However, this obviously leaves a gap between the first 7 weeks and the following 62 weeks. It's a gap of 98 years between 538 BC and 440 BC. What now becomes evident and very significant is this gap is also a period of weeks, 14 weeks, an unstated period of weeks. The final week of the prophecy is yet to take place. As the fulfillment of the reasons given for the entire 70 weeks have not yet been complete, there is another gap taking place between the 62 weeks and the final 1 week. We are currently in the 290th week of this gap, and rapidly approaching the end of this week. Whether or not 2025 AD as the beginning of the next week proves to be prophetically significant, the pattern of this prophecy becomes clear. In Daniel 9:23, Gabriel told Daniel, "So understand the message and gain understanding in what has appeared." The words themselves were not the only thing Daniel was to know. He was to see the pattern, the blueprint of the time periods of weeks. Gabriel stated 3 clearly defined time periods, but there were also 2 time periods between, unstated gaps, which are also periods of weeks. This is how the prophecy of the 70 weeks is arranged. This interpretation satisfies all the facts that have been identified regarding the content and the Hebrew language of the text. This has been an overview of some of the major areas which most people have not recognized or have misinterpreted about the 70 weeks prophecy. There is much more content and evidences which I could not include. It is all addressed in great detail in my other presentations and in my book. Has this presentation stirred your curiosity to investigate more? Or have you put defensive walls against alternate explanations? One of the first questions will probably be, so why hasn't this interpretation been put forward before? There are some very good reasons why the evidences I have presented have not been commonly recognized as the proper interpretation of these texts. One of the main reasons is the lack of accurate understanding of Jewish culture for the majority of the history of the Christian Church. A second main reason, which is directly related, is the reliance on and blind allegiance to church tradition and mistranslations of the Hebrew text. There is much that has been understood correctly by biblical scholars, but this prophecy, which is universally accepted as one of the central texts of prophecy, has never been properly understood by Christianity as a whole. And it's only now, in our modern age, that the evidences that I've presented are gaining traction and becoming recognized as the proper interpretation of the prophecy of the 70 weeks. This is why the Ezra 6:14 challenge exists. It separates all the faulty interpretation from the one correct one. I hope you will now take the time to investigate all the other evidences that I could not include in this presentation. I have a series of 7 presentations that go into a lot more detail. There is much more to be said about all of these things. When I first discovered them, I was simply amazed how it all fits together so elegantly. See you next time.